Hello, BookTube. I've got 10 more random books for you. Another random electronic bookshelf tour. I'd just mark a starting point, go through a few more books, just chat about them with you. A lot of you seem to be liking these. I think it's a lot of fun to do. I will try in the remaining week of 2023 to do at least one more bookshelf essential as well. But in the meantime, I thought we'd look over some of these things and see what we can find. So the first one is an anthology by Harlan Ellison, the science fiction author who is most famous for his anthology Dangerous Visions. But he helmed a whole bunch of science fiction anthologies and had a kind of talent for them. This is his one, Alone Against Tomorrow. And it is about not so much aliens as alienation. This is not about, it's not so much about future technology or future worlds as it is how disaffecting those things will be to the humans involved in it. It's a rather high-handed, high-concept through line for an anthology. I remember this as being fairly good, but it's going to be a question of whether or not you like the kinds of stories Ellison picks. That might sound rudimentary for an anthology, but there are two different kinds of anthologists. There's the kind of anthologist who takes themselves out of the equation, or tries to, in order to present the best things they can find, the best smattering, the best representation of an entire spectrum of a subject. And then there's the part that puts themselves in to the hilt, and Ellison is the second part. So you're getting, one science fiction writer said decades and decades ago that every Harlan Ellison anthology is an anthology of stories Ellison never got around to writing himself. And that's why he picked them. You're very much going to get that. That's not always a deal killer. So if what was it called again? Alone Against Tomorrow came out 60 years ago. The quality of feeling alienated by technology is 100,000 times greater now than it was then. It's greater now than Ellison, a science fiction futurian, could possibly have imagined. And he tried to imagine a few different futures. Nothing as dystopian as this, as the kind of alienation that we feel now. Then this next one is by Rutland Etheridge. I've mentioned this book a couple of times before. I have a mass market paperback that I like. I think it might be part of a broader world, maybe other novels. I've never actually encountered anything by this author out in the wild. And I don't remember, I got this at the bookstore when it came out 30 years ago, and I don't remember ever seeing anything else. This is called Brother John. It calls itself a novel of the duelists, and it takes place in a future society in which there is a category of fighters in this great collective of humanity called duelists, who are alleged to be the greatest fighters of them all. The most skilled, the most disciplined. They have their own academy, their own training ritual. And our main character is a good-hearted, ordinary, working, everyday colonist in a space civilization. But he has a distinguishing characteristic, which is that he's enormous. He's 7 feet tall and gigantic. He's not a beanpole. He's a giant. He's called a giant innumerable times in this book. And at the beginning of the book, he encounters someone claiming to be a duelist who wants to fight, and handles him easily, handles him with what amounts to super strength. And the identity of that person becomes integral to the rest of the book as the character, Brother John. John is brought closer and closer into the orbit of the duelists, into maybe becoming one himself, maybe becoming the greatest one of them all. And it's a well thought out science fiction world. It's not a big thing at all. It's basically a pulp adventure story. In fact, when I first read it, my first reaction was, this is one of those science fiction novels that is just a Western. This is just a Western novel with ray guns and, hazmat suits and whatnot. I don't so much mind that. I'm not so much against that. I am just enough of a Captain Future fan so that I don't object to that on fundamental levels. Although it, of course, is lazy compared to what science fiction can really do. I didn't think this was a very lazy book. I rather liked it. I keep meaning, maybe now that it's cropped up on one of these random book assemblies, I keep meaning to look into the duelists, see if there are other duelist novels. I might like them. I might even like to follow the adventures of this character, although, again, when I read the book, I thought, okay, you've now told me, it's been 6 pages, and you've now told me 20 or 30 times that John is a giant. You've used that word over and over and over and over again the only thing anyone who knows him in these opening scenes talks about. It's the only thing they seem to notice. If that's all there is to him, then I don't want to read about him. And so I'd be watching for that. And I didn't detect much more than that. So maybe I need to revisit the book. Then we have Robert Cormier. This may be his greatest book. A lot of you probably read this in school. This is The Chocolate War. This is a new cover, but it's the story of, it's what we would now call YA. When this first came out, that designation did not exist, and I don't think it's particularly helpful in most cases. So I hesitate to call this that. This is YA in the same way that The Lord of the Flies is YA. And it's a very Lord of the Flies type book. Oh my. There is no sharpening the stake at both ends, but this is a story of a fundraiser at a boys' school. The fundraiser involves selling chocolate bars. And everyone we see everyone involved in this, from the boys who are hapless pawns, either not really wanting to do this but being forced to by the school's infrastructure, or who have been co-opted mentally by that competition infrastructure and are now creatures of the chocolate war. They are creatures of it, and it is genuinely personally important to them. Those of you who did not go to all-boys boarding schools, especially Catholic all-boys boarding schools, might not be familiar with coercive, compulsory school fundraising activities where you have to sell something. But it's captured beautifully here. But it's not just the boys. It's the administrators. It's the teachers themselves, one in particular. Oh, it is merciless. An absolutely merciless book. There is not a single ray of sunlight anywhere in here that I remember. I mean, it's been years since I read it, but I remember the daring part of this book being that it is every bit as bleak an observation about human nature as The Lord of the Flies is. I think there's a one-to-one comparison between the two books, even though their settings are very intentionally different. Nevertheless, a winner of a book. Oh my God. I know your library has it. If you've seen it your whole life and never thought to read it, give it a try. Give it a try. Also, in a very rare instance here, you might want to try the movie. There's a movie of the Chocolate War that is also really, really good. John Glover is in it as one of the main architects of the charity drive, and he gives one of the best performances of a career that has often frustrated me. He's terrific. John Glover is absolutely terrific, but you can't really fault him, always gone for the network paycheck. As opposed to, or I don't know, maybe he's an a-hole. Maybe he doesn't get past auditions for actual movies, but he's terrific. He's really, really good. And he's never better than in that movie, even though that movie's like 50 years ago or something like that. Then we have a murder mystery. I think I might have complained about this one already. This is called Crime at Gilford by Freeman Willis Crofts, a mystery author that I continue to try. I continue to give this guy bites at the apple. I don't know why. I just continue to do it, even though his books disappoint me every single time. And maybe none more so than this book. He has a main recurring character, Inspector French, who is called in once it is obvious that a crime has been committed, and he doggedly investigates it, talks with people, compares their stories, looks to see if there are any time discrepancies between their stories, finds out what those time discrepancies are. So-and-so says they arrived at point B from point A in 15 minutes. What was the traffic like on the day that they made that ride? Let's do it myself and see. Let's do it in different traffic conditions and see. Has anyone corroborated that time? Let's say so-and-so says the window on the second floor is sticky. Is it sticky? Does it stick in all weathers? I am sure that there is a compelling murder mystery to be written that does exactly those things. But this author, there's one line in this book that gives Inspector French anything even remotely approaching a personality. And I'm not sure, given the context of that line, I'm not sure that it really isn't conveying the personality of his wife and not him at all. This is a murder mystery about a group of businessmen from Norns Limited. They are a struggling fine gem retailer, and their board and their accountant are going to meet at a country house because they are in danger of losing their business. They need to work out some sort of restructuring, some sort of retrenching, and one of them ends up dead. And so French has to figure out who knew anything about the state of the business, who knew that this meeting was happening out in the country, who knew, etc., 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 and when did they know it, and how, and it is all, you've heard the term police procedural. Well, this is so procedural. Oh my God. You're practically signing French's timesheets. And I guess that's supposed to be enthralling. I know that this guy was popular in his heyday. This originally, Gilford is the place where the country house is. This was originally called Crime at Norns, and that is at least a better title. But nope. This is just. I try to think who would like this. When you write for Publishers Weekly or for Kirkus or for a library journal, one of the questions that you are asked always to keep in mind is who would like this? The question is never phrased as, is there anybody who would like this? It is assumed that every book has somebody who would like it. I have reviewed hundreds of books in the last 20 years where that assumption just falls apart, where there is no one who would like it. This, I am sure there are people who love this author, at least maybe not anymore. I don't know that he's in print anymore. But in his heyday, I'm sure there were people who loved him. And I try to read a book like this and think, why? Why would someone love this? I think it's just a fascination with how police do their job. Methodically, clue by clue, moment by moment, with the lightning bolt, the enlivening thing being the moment. I guess in even the most procedural, police procedural, there will always be a moment of inspiration. There'll always be a moment where the inspector's intuition leaps from one fact to another instead of remorselessly building a road. And that does happen to Inspector French at the climax of this book. It's a pretty small thing, but I guess maybe that's the reason people do it. Okay, then this next one, I hate to say it, but just finding this on the electronic shelf, I don't remember who published this. In this case, the publisher makes a difference. But it's going to look like this. It was from about 70 years ago. It was a big 2-volume, heavily annotated edition of the complete works of Jonathan Edwards, religious crackpot from colonial America, who he spent all his time here, but he didn't like to call himself an American. And his writings are amazing. They are amazing. And this set, I had this set once upon a time with the unmistakable brown dust jacket. The 2 big volumes, tons of annotation, the kind of works of Jonathan Edwards that this author deserves, even though his work is psychotic. It is just so psychotic. I mean, you will most know this author probably for his infinitely anthologized sermon, Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God. Read that sermon. Just sit down and read it. I'm sure that you can find it in any anthology that you have in the house. Read that anthology. Read that sermon. And think for a minute what this person is trying to convey. It's horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. And it's mild compared to some of the things in here. Although some of the things in here are just long theological discussions of important events, of important Christian concepts, free will, for instance. I wish that I could find this in the wild. Every time somebody unloads a theology library at the Brattle, I always look for this, hoping I'd never get anything from those halls because I'm not all that interested in most of the subject, but I would grab these if I found them. Absolutely. So if you like Jonathan Edwards, or if you think you might want an exhaustive edition of his work, that's the one to get. I just don't know the publisher, but it'll look like that. It was 2 big brown dust jacketed hardcovers. Okay, then we have okay, this is nudging right up next to Jonathan Edwards. He would not have liked that. This is the fantastic art of Boris Vallejo. This big paperback, which I think I still have this here somewhere. This has an introduction by Lester Del Rey, who can always be counted on to use euphemisms in just the right way here. And this is a collection of really big, full color, really good definition reprints of the artwork of Boris Vallejo, the fantasy covers, fantasy posters. There's a lot of stuff in this book that I have never seen in the wild. A lot of stuff in this book was never associated with a book. So you could buy as much science fiction and fantasy as you want. You would never have come across them. That wasn't always the way. 90% of what Boris Vallejo did was for book covers. But there's plenty of stuff in here that isn't that. This is, until he gets, I think he's had another artwork of Boris Vallejo book since this. This came out about 50 years ago. I think he's had this was a paperback that I had. I don't know if this ever came out in hardcover. I think he's had a big book since then, but I don't think he's ever had a kind of study of his work. I know there'll be art snobs who'll say he doesn't deserve it, but he does, of course. And uh, I don't think that's ever happened. I don't think that study has ever existed, unless I've just missed it completely. Seeing this now and talking about it, I do really want to pull this down off the shelf and take a look at it again, because he's incredible. Okay, then we have an anthology. This is C.S. Lewis, God in the Dock. Melodrama about the persecution of Christians, of course. As you can't escape that when you're dealing with Christian apologetics, and there's no Christian apologetic in modern times better known than C.S. Lewis. God is not in the dock. You are in the dock if you don't believe in God. Okay, but you have to swear by God in order to get into the dock. If you don't swear, you're taken into remand without any kind of trial. But anyway, C.S. Lewis did a whole bunch of theological essays and a whole bunch of theological considerations, and this is not that. These are instead deadline prose that is about theology. A very big difference. Here, book reviews of religious books. Somebody wants, a quick meditation on this or that anniversary, this or that saint, this or that Christian subject. I'm not going to say that Lewis would dash off a piece, because he's an extremely capable, intelligent, and wonderfully readable author. So it feels a little wrong to call anything in this book dash off, but it is occasional prose. And it's a really good volume of occasional prose. Okay, then we have a novel. I didn't know that there would be a religious theme in here. That was not intended. This is Wilfred Sheed. This is The Hack, his novel, The Hack, about a down-at-his-heels writer who will write anything for anything. He'll write anything for anybody. But he has fallen into the orbit of Catholic magazines back when there was a booming industry. This is old. This is from the 1950s or 60s, something like that. So it reflects a different age. You've got the manual typewriter there. We get a lot about the main character's dealings with the periodical hack world. Where can you get $30? Who's taking pieces? Do you have anyone editing you in excess of what they're paying you? That sort of thing. But this is also about faith, as you can tell from the gaudy crucifix on the cover. This is also about faith, because the main character is losing his Catholic faith, and a lot of other characters in this book are losing their faith too, including, rather cannily, different kinds of faiths that aren't religious. This is, I don't want to overpraise this. This is not one of Wilfred Sheed's best books. It's certainly not even one of his best novels. It is good, and he can't help himself. He was such a good writer that he can't help himself. Some of the descriptions in here, some of the tossed off phrases, you will underline them. You will want to put them in a commonplace book. You'll want to keep them because they're so good. And it ends up being syrupy. It can't really help but end up being syrupy. I don't think She'd had the courage to give this book the conclusion that he himself sets up in the course of the action. Still is very readable. Still is very good. Okay, then we have a much more recent book. This is by Laura Bates, who went above and beyond. Talk about dangerous reporting. This is her book, Men Who Hate Women, in which she goes into the what we now call the incel community online, delves deeply into their hidden message boards, their hidden communities, takes on artificial names, gives those names artificial personalities, worked really hard to go incognito where these men talk to each other about women. Some of that is known, in popular reporting. I'm sure that you can encounter some of it. Some of it you have to go down deep behind paywalls in private communities to know in its horrifying details. And she did, knowing that she was going to write a book about it and that it was going to be revealed and that she would be in severe physical danger because of that. And so she reveals here an online world. It's not only online, though. It's more and more analog. An online world of men whose ideas about women. If you've read in the last 5-6 years about the incel phenomenon, then you know the tip of the iceberg. The things in this book, the two main aspects in this book that I didn't know, you might not know, and that really stuck with me, really make this a must-read of a book, especially if you have children. The two main things that struck out to me were the numbers involved. It is typically characterized in the popular press as a fringe element, but the numbers are gigantic, absolutely gigantic. And the other thing that jumped out at me was how early boys start to get inducted into this sort of thing, how quickly they gravitate towards it, how I guarantee you, if you have a boy who is under the age of 15, he has been in some of these chat rooms. He might not tell. He won't tell you. He won't tell anybody. But he's been finding in those chat rooms. He if he's normal, if he has sisters, if you've raised him right, and I'm assuming that you have, he's not going to hate women. He's not going to like people who do. So he might have explored these things to find out what they are and been repulsed. But he's going to know people. He will directly know people who weren't repulsed, who liked the camaraderie that they found there, the acceptance that they found there. Horrifying. Absolutely. An essential book. An absolutely essential book. This is very much not a book about an isolated temporary internet phenomenon. Not at all. This is much more important than that. Something that I don't want to be alarmist, but I think every parent in America should read it. Then we have this is Dwayne Newcomb. This is a gardening book. For a while, I was toying with the idea of gardening. I eventually gave it up because it involved too much stooping, but it led me to read about gardening, and that led to two kinds of reading. One was meditations about what gardens mean, and some of those books are some of the loveliest books that I've read in the last 5 years. Just lovely gardening literature, which I had totally ignored. I assumed that you needed to garden in order to get it. You don't. The other part of the literature that I have increasingly come to like reading is gardening manuals, books that are trying to help you garden. And most of those books are acutely aware of the fact that you might want to garden, you might want to grow your own food, even though you live in an urban setting. 95% of the humans on Earth live in urban settings. They do not have a backyard garden. They don't have access to much room at all. And there are a lot of books that want to help you with that. Square foot gardening is one I talked about on this channel a couple of years ago. And here's another one. This is the Postage stamp garden book, which gives you all sorts of strategies. They are basically the same strategies as I found in square foot gardening. It just means you have to know exactly where you're planting things and exactly how much room they need. If you very much concentrate, bear down on that ahead of time, you can get a huge amount of yield in, well, a square foot or a square yard. You don't need a sprawling amount of space, in other words. It needs to be the right kind of plants for the right kind of situation, but once you have that, it's amazing how much food you can grow. And that's what this book is all about, and it's wonderfully done, wonderfully drawn, wonderfully antic in its writing. Then we have Edgar Snow. This is also from a long time ago. This is for 50 years or so ago. This is Red Star over China. His groundbreaking look at Maoist China, where there weren't many Westerners who got into Maoist China and got a chance to see it and write about it, and it's fascinating. I am poised on the brink of a huge amount of reading about Maoist China, so I will definitely be rereading this thing. And Edgar Snow is a pretty good writer, so you'll be entertained the whole time, even when some of the contents horrify you. Then we have more science fiction. This is Robert Heinlein. This is from his. A lot of his books were reissued with Frank Frazetta artwork. And this is Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Look at that Frazetta artwork. You know it a mile off, don't you? This is standard Heinlein about a boy who becomes a space hero. Very much meant to be what we would now consider YA. Although plenty of adults read this and love it, I thought it was terrific. I recently found a mass market paperback of this that I put it on the pile of mass market paperbacks, and I mean to reread it. It's been a long time since I read this book. Full of, Billy Starr type adventures, but all done with Heinlein's frequent digressions into astrophysics, even questionable astrophysics. So now that I have it feels wrong. It would feel wrong to read that in any way other than a cheap mass market paperback. And now that I have a cheap mass market paperback, I really should reread it. And then we'll finish up with an oldie but a goodie. This is Beowulf. This is Hal Chickering. And this is his dual language version of Beowulf that I originally had in a big hardcover that didn't look anything like, didn't have old swords on the cover. And it's exactly what it says. You've got the text of Beowulf on one side and a modern English version on the other side. And that's fascinating on its own. I resist the idea. Beowulf superfans always say that it's possible for you to figure out the Old English without being instructed in it. I think it's a completely foreign language. I think that's totally unrealistic. It's not the same thing as figuring out Chaucer without a gloss or without a translation. But it's fascinating to look at the two side by side. And obviously, Chickering gives you a lot more than that. The critical apparatus on this volume, no matter what it looks like, no matter what the cover looks like, is amazing. It is amazingly good. The introduction, the notes, the footnotes, the endnotes, everything. This is an amazing counterpoint to the Seamus Heaney Beowulf, which doesn't have a lot of that. Doesn't have a lot of that scholarly apparatus. It was going instead for readability. I'm not sure that Chickering's Beowulf is all that readable, but boy, oh boy, if you want to know about the poem, this is a terrific volume to have. So there you go. There you go. Just 10 more random books that we can just chat about. That's all. Don't know. I don't know how to categorize these in any other way. They're a lot of fun to do. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. This has gone on quite long enough. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.